Leaders aligned with the opposition has intensified their campaign against President William Ruto, accusing him of betraying the interests of the Kenyan people. These leaders include former Defense Cabinet Secretary Eugine Wamalwa and Saboti Member of Parliament Caleb Amisi. Both of them have been vocal about the president's alleged insensitivity towards the economic challenges plaguing the country. Adding fuel to fire, the opposition leader Raila Odinga has called for tax boycotts and acts of civil disobedience, urging Kenyans to resist the implementation of the new taxes imposed through the Finance Bill 2023. This call for protest comes at a time when the High Court of Kenya has taken a significant step by halting the implementation of the Finance Bill. The court's decision followed a lawsuit sponsored by Busia Senator Okiya Omtata, who challenged the legality of the bill, citing its alleged violation of taxation laws. As a result, President Ruto's plans to raise additional funds through new taxes have hit a roadblock. The combination of opposition leaders' threats to impeach President Ruto and the court's intervention in the finance bill has intensified the political landscape in Kenya. Now, these developments have underscored ongoing debates surrounding economic policies, governance, and the exercise of executive power in the East African country. But where does that leave Kenya? I am Kemini Amano, and you're welcome to the square. Joining our gathering from Nairobi are Richard Bozire, who is a political affairs analyst. We also have Rickson Mobarak Etindi, who is also a political analyst. And last but not least, we have Telen Zomo, programs officer with Siasia Place. Gentlemen, you're welcome to the square. I want to start with you, Richard. How do you assess this recent threat of impeachment against the President William Ruto by the opposition leaders? Can we take this seriously, or is this just a political move the opposition has made?
Thank you for inviting me here. I think the threat by the opposition to impeach President Ruto is just political lottery, because President Ruto right now controls majority of the parliament, because some of the Azimio opposition MPs shifted allegiance after Ruto's win, and the passage of the recent passage of the Finance Act bill in parliament is a true reflection that Ruto controls parliament. He can make any moves in parliament, so it means the opposition cannot manage to pass such a motion, which requires a 3/3 majority to pass. It's a tall order for the opposition to even bring that impeachment motion to the National Assembly, because it won't pass, according to me.
Indeed. Rickson, I'm going to ask you the same question, but also analyze for us whether there is a genuine basis for the call for impeachment. Well, I have a feeling Rickson cannot hear us yet. I'll take that question to Tele Nzomo. Tele, if you can hear us, I'll ask you the same question. Can we take this impeachment call seriously, but also analyze for us whether or not the opposition has any genuine basis at all for an impeachment call on the president?
Yeah, well, I agree with Richard in the sense that right now William Ruto has majority of the members of parliament on his side, which means that it's not going to be possible to impeach him. And as they said, it will be almost impossible to bring it to the floor of the House. As far as whether it's a genuine call, I think that for impeachment to take place, there has to be serious crimes that have been committed by the president. Right now, what we're accusing him of is more or less bad policy. Right, we're not happy with the policies that he has on economic issues. There are questions on the legality of the finance bill. As we just speak, the courts have ruled against the 50 CASs who he had appointed. But those are issues that I think have been there before, where presidents have made decisions that may not necessarily be constitutional, but the courts have taken those decisions at hand. So I don't think there's any serious or any good reason at this particular moment to say that you want to impeach the president. You can't just impeach the president because you disagree with him or because you disagree with his policies. There has to be a crime that has been committed. And the question now that the opposition has to answer is, what is that crime?
I see, and I want to see if what is described as the betrayal of the Kenyan people because of the current cost of living in the country could fall within those things that could prompt a call on the president, an impeachment call on the president. Rickson, I want to hear your thoughts on that. Will this, what the opposition call as betrayal, be a reason enough for an impeachment vote on the president?
Thank you very much. I'll start by answering you directly by saying that the call for impeachment of the president and terming it as betrayal is a 50-50 share, a 50-50 kind of situation. In that, yes, the Kenya Constitution gives the electorate the mandate, even not at the president level, but even if a member of parliament is not performing, or any elected state officer is not performing, we can do a recall, or you can be impeached. A president also can be impeached. In Kenya history, we've never had a president being impeached because of the long list of steps that have to be followed. I think it is possible to impeach a president if the electorate feels betrayed, because this person is elected to the office through the manifesto that he gave to the electorate. So the threats should be taken seriously, because we know that here in Kenya currently, things are not how they were promised to be. I don't want to call it as a mere threat, but I know if due process is followed, it can escalate to an impeachment, which has never happened. But also it's very difficult considering the fact that we've had a lot of members from the opposition crossing the floor to join the government side. We don't know the motive. Maybe rumors go around that they are bought or something.
I see, Rickson.
I know that it will be difficult to impeach the president because of the step that the parliament has to vote. It will not pass that step.
Absolutely. And Richard has also made that point. But for the sake of argument and for the sake of this discussion, if the opposition were to go ahead and move in parliament for an impeachment vote on the president, we have established that it was going to be difficult. But in the political atmosphere of Kenya, what impact could it have on the popularity of the president amongst the people? Richard, what would you say?
Definitely, it will affect his popularity, considering majority of Kenyans who are not in support of the finance bill, because it is going to affect the cost of living through the taxation of the VAT on fuel and housing levy. So it means Kenyans are not happy with those proposals. So it's up to the president now to go back to the drawing board and do some changes to the Finance Act, and also negotiate with the opposition so that he can pass his Finance Act, because he has a plan of, he said he wants to build 200,000 houses per year in Kenya. So if this Finance Act is not approved in Parliament, if the courts don't approve it, it will be a huge task to the president in implementing his promises to Kenyans, especially the creation of the construction of houses, and also the other one, which is creation of jobs for the youth, jobless youth. They're waiting for jobs, the building of the houses. So it will be a setback to the president if he doesn't succeed in implementing this Finance Act. But I'm sure he will use all his means to make sure that the Finance Act becomes law, and the courts will overrule that ruling.
Indeed.
That's my thing.
Indeed. And speaking of negotiations, we've had that before, back in March, April, when the opposition had decided that it was going to do its weekly protest. We know how that ended. Now the opposition is back in the fray, is calling for tax boycotts, is calling for protests. Tell us how this could shape the conversation going forward?
I think the opposition has seen. I think the opposition has seen a weakness with government, with the finance bill. I think that one of the issues that happened before, in the lead up to the last phases of what they call mandamanos, was that the opposition at the time was talking more about electoral reforms, but Kenyans were not necessarily as interested on the issues of electoral reforms. We're starting to see, I think, as Richard mentioned, that this finance bill has been really, really unpopular, and a lot of Kenyans are unhappy about it. We already saw the increase of fuel prices in the country. This is something that we could see where the opposition sees an opportunity to actually now have another round of protests, and this time actually be bigger protests, because in the last round we saw that it was a little bit isolated to places like Nairobi, Kisumu, and other of the Raila Odinga strongholds. I think that with this, they feel that we could see much bigger protests. We could see it in more parts of the country. They're looking at a situation where they see a vulnerable government, and I think they'll want to take advantage of that.
I see. But Rickson, realistically, can the Kenyan people decide, as the opposition is calling for, not to pay their taxes, even if the president is able to find a way around the current High Court ruling?
It is very much possible, because it's important that you understand that the opposition leader, Raila Odinga, commands a lot of Kenyans, both who voted and didn't vote. And we can recall what happened in 2017 after the election, where the leader called for rebels on some products and blah 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 blah. So we saw big companies like Safaricom suffering big losses, and you know that the government is collecting taxes through such things, and also it is difficult. Yes, they can still force their way in for those who are employed, but for those who are unemployed, who are earning their income informally, it will be very difficult. And unfortunately, they are the majority. Currently, the country is facing a big problem because the government came to power through promises of job creation. They came in as the perfect solvers of the Kenyan problem, only to realize that months later, it is the directly opposite of what they were saying. And now, also, the government officials themselves, including the president himself, I think the president himself, according to me, is a very sharp person. I've been following him for some time, but I wonder what has happened to him, because maybe I want to blame it maybe on the advisors, because it is very difficult. It is not realistic to push down a citizen who can barely afford a meal a day, and you're increasing taxes on him and employing more and more and more people that he should pay, yet this person cannot even afford a meal in a day. The masses have now felt the heat, and I know that in the coming demonstration it will be huge, and it can be of a very big impact.
But
another thing that
Rickson, I want to take you up. Rickson, if you can hear me, I want to take you up on something that you have said, that realistically people could say that, particularly those in the working class could say that they will not be paying their taxes. But I see two things happening here. The fact that they will be breaking the law if indeed this is applied post High Court ruling. If this is applied, then we would see people breaking the law, which would have consequences. But also you make a very strong point about the fact that there are many people who are in the informal sector who may be paying, the 3% fee on small businesses. But really, it calls to question the effectiveness then of the tax boycotts, doesn't it?
The effectiveness of the tax boycott directly, especially like for those who are employed, is not very much realistic, because you'll find that the government will be the one that will be imposing that. You cannot tell me that the TSC, Teacher Service Commission, will decide to not to do the deductions. As the person who's being paid, I'll receive the payslip, after all those decisions have been made. It's very difficult for me to do that, but I can rebel in this other means. The other day, the opposition leader gave a very short list of how we can go about these things. He was saying that instead of driving to work, use blah blah, and that is going to counter the government projection, because they knew that fuel, most people are using fuel. So by increment of fuel, like those people who are driving to work, they'll be paying and paying and paying. But now, through that whatever the opposition leader said, it's going to be difficult for them to realize their goal.
I see. Now it's also a fine time to ask the question, what became of the dialogue post the weekly protests that took place in Kenya in Kenya in the first and second beginning of the second quarter of this year? And Richard, talk to us about that. Do you know what became of that? Why the opposition has said the things that is said since they decided to go into dialogue?
The Azimio coalition pulled out of the talks, and they claim that there's no goodwill from the government side. And already the government side had already said that they want Azimio to resume talks so that they can start negotiations on the reconstitution of the IEBC. So far there's a stalemate, and the talks are not going on. And you are aware on Friday there's a demonstration called Sabasaba, Maandamano Day. On Friday the opposition will be on the streets in protest of the Finance Act, and also against the President William Ruto's regime. So it's like we have gone back to square one, and the talks cannot resume at the moment. So unless they start fresh negotiations from Parliament, also between Ruto and Raila, we can never expect the talks anytime soon.
And that's why I want to stay with you on that. We are back to the beginning again, where opposition is calling for another set of rallies. How impactful have these rallies been in the past, and what can the Kenyan people look forward to as far as the new ones are concerned?
Of course, the first part of the demonstration was focusing on the outcome of the election. The opposition was demanding for release of the opening of the election servers, and also demanding that President Ruto resign. But this time they are saying they are protesting because of the cost of living, which affects all Kenyans. So I think the opposition will have more support this time across the country, and unlike previously. So the president has a huge task of convincing the opposition to stop the demonstrations and come back or the negotiation table and talk about their issues. So on Friday it will be a turning point, and we expect the president to react. And so I am assuming that maybe in the next 1 or 2 weeks we shall see them back to the drawing board and negotiating on the issues.
And then the cycle begins again. But I want us to put the opposition aside for just a little bit and talk about the High Court ruling, and what the president could do, or the William Ruto-led administration could do at this point, because already it's lost 3 days of collecting the taxes, which he says it needs to run, this tenor, it needs to manage the economy of Kenya. And so tell us, Zoma, I come with you on this one. What are the options available for the president at this point, as far as this ruling is concerned? What are the ways around it? What can they do, or what do you suspect they will do at this point?
I think for now it's to wait, first of all, for the case to be heard. Right now, the ruling was just a suspension in the finance bill, but the case is yet to be heard. I think it's very likely that even if they're going to be challenges with the finance bill, it's likely that that if the court is to rule against it, it may not necessarily rule against the entire bill, but may rule against certain clauses of the bill, if that is the case. I believe the president will definitely try and appeal. I think this is a situation, if the courts rule against him, he will try as much as possible to have this go up until the Supreme Court. It will definitely affect how government is running. He has a very, very ambitious plan for the country. A lot of expenditure needs to be done. We had a budget that is 3.6 trillion Kenyan shillings. That's I think the largest budget we've had as a country. That budget has to be financed somehow. So it will definitely provide him with a challenge in as far as trying to come up with solutions. Maybe you might look at having to reduce expenditure so that, in the case that certain clauses of the finance bill are ruled against him, you may look at reducing the expenditure so that he can try and balance that budget to that extent. There's also the case of him having to borrow more, which is something that we're hoping will not happen. But as things stand right now, we are seeing government actually borrowing quite a bit. Locally, we are seeing interest rates from the central bank increasing interest rates. So I think he has different options, but I know for a fact if they do rule against him, this is a situation that will be appealed probably up until the Supreme Court.
Indeed. I'm going to come back to you on that, but I do want us to look at the arguments that the Busia Senator Omtata has put across in court. He talks about the fact that the finance bill contravenes taxation laws in Kenya, and the court seems to agree with Omtata. But Rickson, does it really? Does the finance bill, which was passed by the legislation, contravene taxation laws in the country?
Senator Okiya Omtata on his argument, because the purpose of the executive is maybe just to take the taxes, but now you find that those additional things, like they had brought it in a way like it's like a saving. I don't know, it's like what, I understand that the government is trying to get money so that they can fulfill the promises, but it's also not within their jurisdiction to force people to save. We understand that we have an economic problem worldwide because they say that it's attributed to the Russia-Ukraine war, and you find that from that time we have been having economic hardships slowly by slowly, and now you come in because you want to fulfill what you say that you want to fulfill. You want to come unconstitutionally to force me to save. It is not. It's not okay. Okiya Omtata has won several cases against governments, not just this one, because we find that the institution, the judiciary, legislature, and the executive, they're independent, but you find that in a way, the executive tries to control the two. You find like the issue that we are solving today, the issue of the CAS appointment. Senator Omtata presented the case again. It is unconstitutional. The courts ruled that it is unconstitutional, but still it went on. The courts sometimes, the judiciary sometimes they make decisions, and the executive does not want to implement the decisions. So whether I understand from my own point of view that it's still going to be like that. Whether the courts rule that Okiya has a case or not, that is going to be like that. But it's also important to understand that both the government side and the opposition side is filled with some people who are mischievous, in a way that yes, it can be brought back to the parliament, but you can see from what happened during the voting, some of the members from the Azimio who were supposed to vote no to the bill, they ran away from parliament. They were not there. They were not there to do that.
I see, Rickson, I hear you, but I also hear you raise concerns about whether or not the executive will adhere to the court's ruling, and that's concerning, isn't it? If you think that based on what you've seen in the past, the courts could have their say, but the executive will have their way at the end of the day. That's a very concerning combination for governance, isn't it, Rickson?
It's a very concerning issue because even my friends here can recall that even before the former Chief Justice retired, he had declared that the Kenyan Parliament was not constitutionally made up. and he even asked the president to dissolve it. But you see, the judiciary has played its part by advising and giving its ruling, but that one will never be followed. Like now, for this, and a good example is this case of the CSs. Sometimes we have issues where maybe a state has been ordered by the judiciary to do a particular thing, or maybe someone is even being called. They just decide to not to do it. So yes, we have the independence, but to my point of view, I can say that it is not effective as per now.
I see. We'll see what happens to this particular case. But Richard, I come to you now. Feel free to take a dig at the question I asked Rickson. However, I do want you to analyze for us whether or not Kenya losing 3 days of increased tax revenue collection has put it in dire straits as far as the finances of the government is concerned. What do you see over there?
Of course, it's a big blow to the government's plan of creating jobs and implementing the President Ruto's campaign manifesto. But I'm sure they are still collecting taxes, the old taxes, and if they manage to get this Finance Act implemented, I'm sure they'll fast track their plans and have President Ruto's agenda implemented. So it's not a very big setback. They still have time to go back to the drawing board and come up with something that's agreeable to Kenyans, so that it can be passed without difficulties. And I'm also sure they will do some changes on the housing fund and the 16% VAT increase. So those are some of the critical areas which they will deal with before the Finance Act is implemented. But at the moment, Kenyans some of them who are employed still opposed to the housing levy. So but still a huge task to the government to have the Finance Act sail through. But I'm sure they will do some changes the next few days so that they can have it implemented fully.
We'll talk about changes you would expect, if any at all. But I come to Taylor now. Taylor, you mentioned something earlier about the way the case could go, whether it goes in favor of Omtata or it goes in favor of the Ruto administration. And I want us to dig further into that. What are the options here for the government if it goes against it? And what are the options for the people if it goes in favor of the government?
I think that in case it was against the president and his team, I think they're going to look at how they can try and fill the gaps, especially in Parliament. He's as one of the things that has happened is that he has a majority of the people or majority of the members of Parliament behind him. They are clearly doing as he says. I don't think that the people on the side are challenging him, which is quite unfortunate. So I think he will look at maybe where he can plug the holes, number one, from a legal perspective in Parliament. But he may also decide to maybe take a look at, as I said before, about matters of just his policy and his plans, and to look at the issues and the things that he wants to implement, and maybe try and rethink whether he can change his strategy from the side of the expenditure, because it's not just an issue of the courts. I think the aspect of just how unhappy and how angry people are with the increased cost of living could make him rethink. William Ruto as a person is a politician first and foremost, and he will try and if he realizes that the people are not behind him, if he realizes that this is going to cause him to become unpopular, especially in the areas that voted for him. And one of the areas I'm looking at is the Mount Kenya region. If he sees that people are starting to rebel against him, I think he could go back to the drawing board and think of how he can change things or what he can change. He has again a team of good economists behind him, so I think he may try and look at what happens. I think on the side of civil society and what people might do if the decisions don't go their way, if the court rules in favor of the president, then I expect that the people will respect the decisions of the courts. I think it will lead obviously to us having to pay more in as far as taxation. We won't be happy about it. but there's nothing that we'll be able to do in that extent if the courts do rule in his favor.
And see, I see. Now, I do want us to talk about this drawing board because I've had both you and Richard speak about the government going back to drawing board. And so I'm coming back to you, Richard, at this point. If the government were to go back to the drawing board, what would you expect to see as, you know, regarding changes to the finance bill? Well, I think that we have lost Rachel's connection on the Zoom. Rickson, if you could take that question for me. If the government were to take a second look at the finance bill, what are some of the changes that you'd expect to see in it?
Thank you very much. I'll expect to see them do away with that housing bit of it, because each and everyone knows that that thing is unrealistic, and they are using it to lie to the youth that is a way of job creation. How? That one cannot solve the problem of unemployment in Kenya. Some few weeks ago, the deputy president was in a graduation, JQuat, and he was telling the graduates that we don't have jobs for you. And yet, your promise was that you are going to create jobs for us. Now, the government goes around saying that we are trying to fix the problem of unemployment by building these houses. Who told the government that all the youths have done maybe civil engineering, or all of them should go to do the mjengo work, the building work? What about those ones who have done other courses? So does it mean that all these other people, all these other citizens should just go and do those low-key jobs like for building and etc.? It is very wrong, because you cannot tell me to invest in the education, in my education from primary to university, and they have even increased the fees for the university students, only to tell me that I'm going to work in a construction site. It's very wrong. We have so many courses that they have put up in the universities. Where are all this going to be? The only way that they can solve the problem of unemployment is first by lowering these taxes, so that investors can come to Kenya. They invest, they build industries here, so that these youth can be employed. You cannot tell us that housing is the solution to unemployment. And I'm very disappointed as a youth, as an unemployed youth, because you find that we had a lot of hopes in this government. That is why, as per our topic today, impeaching the president, I know that 3/4 of the people have felt betrayed. In this government, we were told that it's going to be a government of a common wananchi. Show me one. The cabinet is full of billionaires. For that case, those ones who have a history of corruption. The common wananchi was told that you, the boda boda rider, we are going to make life easy for you. Instead of making the life easy, you're making it harder. If you go to the fuel pump today and find that a liter of super is selling at around 200 shillings, or 195 to 200 shillings, tell me how many kilometers this person is going to cover. In fact, they are even reducing those who are getting maybe their daily meal from maybe boda boda riding. Most of them are going to drop those jobs, and that's how a government becomes. That's how a country becomes it leads to a lot of issues like insecurity.
Very
because
well.
now these youths, where are we taking them?
Very well, gentlemen. I want us to spend the last 3 or so minutes we have on the alternative the opposition is proposing. Raila Odinga over the last week has talked about what he would have done or what he expected the government to do, his alternative to taxing the people who are already burdened, as he puts it. He talks about budget zero, the fact that they shouldn't be building on the budget of Uhuru Kenyatta. They should start from ground zero, and every spending should be meaningful. Now, he says that the removal of duplication of county roles and responsibility, because it amounts to double resource allocation. And then the big one which is spoken about is government spending. Tell us, Zomo, how important are these things? Could they have been a better way to rein in more revenue than taxation?
Oh, definitely. I think one of the issues about this is not just the fact that Kenyans are paying more taxes. It's the fact that you're asking Kenyans to pay more taxes, but you as government are not willing to make the necessary sacrifices. We're seeing them. They attempted to add the number of chief administrative secretaries, something that the courts has just ruled to be unconstitutional. They have added the number of state departments, the numbers of ministries. Sorry, the number of ministries, departments, and agencies within government. Government is much bigger now than it was under Uhuru Kenyatta. So, you're trying to tell people to make sacrifices in as far as their taxation, but you as government don't want to rein in on how you're spending. And just to add on to that, the number of trips, foreign trips that we're seeing this government, the president himself take has gone up. Before you ask people to start adding to what they are giving to government, you as government need to start leading by example. You have to show that because times are tough, that you're number one, you're starting to seal the loopholes because again, there's still a lot of corruption in the country. So we needed to start with how government is spending and then move from there.
Very well. And Rickson, the points the opposition has made about the government spending resonates with something you have said now. But the other thing I'd like to know, is there anything that the Ruto administration could have done to cushion the Kenyan people from the effects of the increase in taxes? Because let's not forget, Kenya needs the money anyway. Yes, Rickson, that's for you.
Yeah. Yes, I can summarize the whatever the opposition leader said.
No, Rickson, we don't have time. So what I'm asking is, we know that Kenya needs the money for governance, for its economic revival. But is there anything that the government could have done to cushion the people of Kenya from the effects of the increase in taxes in the short to medium term or even long term? Is there anything the government could have done?
Yes, the government has to seal the loopholes of corruption, as my colleague has said.
Did I lose Rickson again? It would seem that the connection with Rickson has dropped again. But gentlemen, be sure that I am grateful for your insight and your time today here on The Square. Thank you so much, Rickson, Telenzomo, and Richard, who we also lost on the connection earlier. That'll be all today. We'll keep an eye on the situation in Kenya. Remember that the Sabasaba is scheduled for July 7th. We'll tell you what has happened with that rally here on Village Square Africa. You want to make time to watch us a day before. My name is Kemeni Amano. Bye-bye.